Tonight we drift into a world where the moonlight slides like silver threads across still water, and the faint ripples under your canoe sound like someone exhaling slowly in their sleep. You're in Tenochtitlan, the great Aztec city, perched like a mirage on Lake Texcoco. The night air smells faintly of damp earth and crushed reeds. The stars above you sparkle so brightly that for a moment you feel they might tumble right into the canal beside you. And honestly, you probably won't survive this place without mosquito bites, a serious sunburn, or accidentally toppling headfirst into the muck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The canoe rocks gently as you trail your fingers in the cool canal. The water feels alive, sliding, shifting, and occasionally brushing your hand with the faint bump of something passing underneath. It could be a fish. It could be a piece of drifting reed. It could also be one of those fat, slow-moving snails that thrive along the lake's edges. You try not to think too hard about that. Ahead, the city whispers in its sleep. Wooden homes and temples glow with faint torchlight, their flames flickering like small hearts still awake. Canals are the city's veins, and you're floating inside them, listening to the lap of paddles, the soft murmur of distant voices, and the occasional call of a night heron. Tenochtitlan never fully sleeps, it hums gently, like your fan at bedtime. Historians still argue whether the city looked more like a Venice of the Americas or a completely unique experiment in urban design. What's certain is that no other city of its time had such an intimate dance with water. You feel it immediately, the sense that land and lake have fused into one seamless whole. You glance left and see tiny points of light bobbing in the water. Fishermen out late, their torches balanced on canoes, hoping to lure fish to the surface. It's oddly hypnotic, like watching stars reflected both above and below. And right then, you think, this would make the perfect late-night screensaver. Your canoe nudges the edge of one of the floating islands, the chinampas. They look solid at first glance, thick with soil, planted with maize stalks that sway like gossiping neighbors. But underneath, they're made of woven reeds layered with mud. They're human-made miracles, and they float with a kind of stubborn grace. Imagine building your own backyard out of sticks and muck, then growing dinner on top. Not exactly a weekend DIY project you'd try from YouTube. A farmer dozes on the chinampa, his back against a pole, his chin tilted up to the stars. His breath is slow, steady, and you feel like you're intruding on a sacred rhythm. Nearby, the faint scrape of a snail crawling across damp soil adds to the hush. Funny, isn't it, how even the smallest creatures become part of the Empire's machinery here? Those little shelled wanderers will soon be plucked, cooked, maybe even offered to the gods. And right now, one is sliming happily along, completely unaware of its destiny. The lake carries a scent of algae, rich and green. It mixes with the smoky hint of torches, the distant tang of roasted maize, and let's be honest, the occasional whiff of something less poetic. Even the greatest empires don't entirely smell like roses. But you breathe it all in, because it feels like you're tasting history itself. Somewhere farther along the canal, a flute begins to play. The tune is simple, a looping melody, perhaps a farmer passing time, or perhaps something older, a song meant to keep the lake spirits at bay. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs truly believed the lake had moods and personalities, but standing here, or rather floating here, it's easy to imagine the water listening, deciding whether to grant favor or mischief. A ripple bumps your canoe. You glance down nervously, half expecting a crocodile. Relax, wrong continent. The Aztecs didn't have those lurking in Lake Texcoco. But snapping turtles? Oh yes. And they could take a toe if you dangled your foot too carelessly. Not exactly the kind of spa pedicure you're looking for. As you drift, the horizon glows faintly pink. Dawn is preparing its entrance. Birds stir in the reeds. Their wings flicker shadows across the water. The first farmers paddle out, their canoes piled with tools, baskets, and sometimes children still rubbing sleep from their eyes. The city begins to stretch, yawn, and blink awake. And you're right in the middle of it, like you've snuck behind the curtain of a vast and ongoing performance. One quirky little fact slips in as you watch them paddle. The Aztecs sometimes smeared their skin with crocodile dung mixed with herbs as a form of sunscreen. Not the sort of thing you'd pick up at your local pharmacy, but hey, it worked for them. You might still prefer SPF 50 in a nice squeeze tube. The sky brightens. The temples of Tenochtitlan rise like dark silhouettes against the fire of the morning. Smoke curls from cook fires, blending with the mist off the water. You can almost feel the empire's pulse quicken with each moment. Somewhere out there, drums will start soon, summoning workers, traders, and priests to their daily duties. And here you are, still afloat, eyes heavy, ears tuned to the quiet symphony of water and waking voices. You're not just observing. You're part of it. The canoe rocks, the water whispers, and the floating gardens breathe life into the city once more. The canoe slides closer to the edge of the chinampa, and you lean forward to see how it's made. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary patch of farmland, rows of maize, beans climbing tall poles, squash curling across the soil. But as you tug on a clump of reeds at the edge, you realize this is no ordinary earth. The ground feels spongy, like it wants to give a little under your weight. These are the famous chinampas, the floating gardens of the Aztec Empire, and they're as brilliant as they are muddy. You watch a farmer step into the water, the hem of his tunic darkening immediately. With steady hands, he pulls reeds, piles them crosswise, then slaps on thick layers of sticky lake mud. It looks almost like building a giant lasagna, only instead of pasta sheets and cheese, you've got swamp muck and cattails. And you'd definitely regret biting into this one. As the farmer works, he hums a low song. It's steady, repetitive, meant to match the rhythm of hauling and stacking. His canoe bobs nearby, loaded with more reeds to weave into the edges. Historians still argue whether chinampas truly floated like rafts or were anchored more like shallow, artificial islands built up from the lake bed. Either way, the illusion is magical. Gardens that seem to ride the lake's surface, tethered only by the will of those who tend them. You crouch and notice something odd. Willow trees planted along the edges of the garden. Their roots dig deep, clutching mud and reeds like fingers holding fast. Their tall branches sway in the lake breeze. It isn't just for beauty, these trees keep the whole structure from drifting away during storms. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your garden floated off overnight like a runaway raft. You'd have to explain to your neighbors why your corn patch is now grazing on someone else's beans. The soil itself is impossibly fertile. The lake is shallow and filled with organic matter, so every scoop of mud is basically a natural compost bin. Farmers dredge the black muck and spread it across the chinampa, layering it like frosting on a cake. Except this cake grows chili peppers. You run your fingers through the dirt and find it cool, damp, and full of tiny wriggling worms, nature's assistants in the empire's agriculture. As the sun rises higher, more farmers appear, balancing bundles of reeds across their shoulders, their children trailing behind with baskets. They work in silence, broken only by laughter now and then, the kind of laughter that comes from shared labor and the occasional splash of mud thrown when someone stumbles. You can almost hear the gossip of the day, who sold their maize too cheap at market, whose canoe sprung a leak, and which neighbor still owes tribute in beans. One farmer gestures for you to try pressing mud between the reeds. You kneel, scooping a handful, and quickly realize this is heavier than it looks. It oozes between your fingers like thick paint. The farmer chuckles as you nearly drop the whole glob into your sandals. And let's be honest, you were never cut out for Aztec farm life. Your idea of gardening probably involves a potted basil plant on a windowsill that dies mysteriously within a week. Still, you manage to smear the mud into the reed wall, sealing a small gap. The farmer nods approvingly, as if to say, "Not bad for a visitor who looks like they'd fall out of a canoe in 5 minutes." Nearby, women kneel in the soil, planting maize seeds in careful rows. They press 3 seeds together: maize, beans, and squash, creating the famous Three Sisters planting. The maize grows tall, the beans climb its stalks, and the squash sprawls at the base, shading the soil. It's agriculture as teamwork, like a plant version of the Avengers. Historians still argue whether this practice spread from other Mesoamerican peoples or was refined uniquely here, but the outcome is clear: abundant harvests feeding an empire. Everywhere you look, the chinampas form a patchwork quilt across the water. Narrow canals cut between them, just wide enough for a canoe. From above, it must look like a green maze stitched into the lake. Farmers paddle through the watery alleys, delivering tools, chatting with neighbors, or occasionally crashing into each other when someone isn't paying attention. Yes, even in the 15th century, there were basically traffic jams, except these came with paddles and soggy sandals. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts: chinampas weren't just for farming. Some were used as flower gardens, bursting with marigolds, dahlias, and fragrant herbs. Imagine paddling home past floating bouquets every day. Forget air fresheners, the Aztecs had whole islands perfuming their commute. You notice the farmer pause to sharpen his wooden digging stick against a stone. He uses it to poke neat holes in the soil, then drops seeds in with practiced flicks of his wrist. The motion is almost hypnotic, like a dance he's performed 1,000 times. You catch yourself swaying along with it, eyelids heavier than you expect. Farming ASMR, centuries before microphones. But it isn't all serene. The farmer wipes sweat from his brow and mutters something about the rains. You don't need to know the language to hear the worry in his tone. Too much rain, and the lake floods, swallowing whole chinampas. Too little, and the soil cracks, crops wither, and families starve. Historians still argue whether sophisticated dikes and canals truly protected the chinampas from extremes, but the anxiety is etched on every farmer's face. A young boy splashes into the canal, chasing after a canoe that drifted loose. He paddles with his arms, laughing, while his mother scolds him from the shore. You grin, some things never change. Children have always been part chaos, part joy. And yes, someone probably still has to fish sandals out of the water at the end of the day. By midday, the chinampa is fully awake. Maize leaves rustle, beans twist skyward, farmers call across the canals, and somewhere in the reeds, snails cling quietly, waiting their turn in the grand cycle. You lean back in the canoe, mud drying on your hands, and feel the rhythm of work all around you. The chinampas stretch beyond sight, floating, shimmering, alive. A city built not just on land, but on ingenuity. And for the Aztecs, this wasn't just farming. It was survival, culture, tribute, and even a touch of poetry. You let the thought settle like silt in water. This place, fragile and strong all at once, is the empire's beating heart. You paddle along the narrow canal, the chinampas closing in on either side like green walls. The water glints in the sunlight, reflecting stalks of maize and climbing beans, but your eyes drift down, closer to the waterline. That's where you notice them, small, dark shells clinging to reeds, half hidden among roots. They look like tiny beads strung along the edge of the chinampa, but they move, slow and deliberate, tracing faint trails of slime across the damp surfaces. Snails. You lean in closer, careful not to tip the canoe. The shells are smooth, some spiraled tight, others flatter, almost like delicate discs. Their muted brown and grey hues blend perfectly with the muck. If you weren't searching, you might never spot them. But once you do, you realize they're everywhere, coiled at the bases of plants, tucked beneath lily pads, sliding over the damp mud where the water kisses the chinampas' edge. A farmer kneels in the shallows, bare feet sunk into cool mud. With practiced ease, he plucks snails from reeds, dropping them into a woven basket strapped to his back. The sound they make is faint, a soft tap each time shell meets basket. You wouldn't think an empire would bother with such small creatures, yet here's a man devoting his morning to gathering them. Historians still argue whether these snails were primarily food, medicine, or ritual offering, but you can tell immediately they're considered valuable. The farmer's movements are precise, deliberate, as if he's plucking jewels from the water's edge. You watch his fingers, coated with silt, moving almost tenderly. Snails might not squeal like pigs or cluck like chickens, but they're as much a harvest as any maize stalk. You scoop one up yourself, feeling its shell cool and damp in your palm. The snail peeks out, tiny antennae stretching like cautious explorers. It tickles as it crawls across your skin, and you laugh quietly, shaking your hand until it drops back into the canal. Somewhere, that snail is probably telling its friends, "You won't believe the giant who tried to carry me off." The farmer notices your reaction and grins. He gestures to his basket and mimics eating. Then he pats his stomach, raising his eyebrows. Translation: snails, good food. You nod, pretending you're completely on board with the idea. Truth is, you're not entirely sure whether you're ready for a snail dinner. But you've eaten stranger things, maybe. There's a rhythm to the snail gathering. The farmer paddles a few feet along the edge, ties his canoe to a willow root, then wades again, plucking, dropping, plucking. Every so often, he shakes out a reed, scattering tiny creatures into the water, then scoops them up with quick hands. His daughter trails behind him, balancing a smaller basket. She giggles when a snail falls and splashes into the canal, leaning dangerously far to fish it out again. Kids, always convinced they're invincible until they fall in head first. One quirky tidbit you recall as you watch: Aztec physicians sometimes ground snail shells into powders, mixing them with herbs to treat coughs or fevers. Imagine going to your doctor today and being prescribed a snail smoothie. Not exactly something you'd find on your pharmacy shelf, unless your pharmacy also doubles as a French bistro. The sunlight shifts, catching the wet shells in the baskets. They glitter faintly, like coins heaped in a treasure chest. It strikes you how even the humblest creatures become riches when collected in enough numbers. For the Aztecs, tribute wasn't always gold or jewels. Sometimes, it was grain, feathers, or even baskets of snails sent from villages to the city. The empire ran on diversity, on every community giving what their environment produced best. As the farmer works, a bird swoops low, its wings brushing the water. It snatches something from the reeds, a snail, perhaps, or a small fish, and disappears into the sky. You blink, and it's gone, leaving only ripples behind. For a moment, you wonder whether the farmer ever felt competition with the herons and ducks. Probably. Nothing says Monday frustration like realizing a bird just stole your breakfast. Still, the work continues. The baskets grow heavier, shells clinking softly with each addition. The farmer's daughter struggles with hers, shifting the strap across her shoulders. She mutters something under her breath, and her father chuckles before lifting it onto his canoe. You catch the expression on her face, a mix of pride and annoyance, the timeless look of a kid wanting to help but realizing chores aren't as fun as they looked at first. Historians still argue whether snail harvesting was an everyday chore or more seasonal, tied to rituals and feasts. Some suggest the Aztecs prized snails most during certain festivals, when foods carried symbolic meaning. Watching the careful way these baskets fill, you can imagine both possibilities. Food and faith were rarely separate here. The canal water laps gently against your canoe. You trail a hand in it, feeling the coolness, and wonder how many centuries of hands have done the same: fishing, farming, gathering. The lake seems timeless, though you know its days are numbered. Floods, droughts, even foreign conquerors will one day change this rhythm forever. But right now, it feels eternal, like a heartbeat pulsing just under the surface. A mosquito buzzes near your ear, and you slap at it instinctively. Too late. You're itching already. The farmer laughs softly, lifting his tunic sleeve to show a row of bites across his arm. Welcome to snail country, where the snails move too slowly to bother you, and the mosquitoes move too fast to escape. The baskets are nearly full. The farmer wipes sweat from his brow, gestures to his canoe, and motions for you to follow. You paddle behind him, the water curling away from your paddle with soft splashes. His daughter hums as she balances on the edge of the canoe, trailing her fingers in the water just as you did earlier. You glance back once more at the chinampas' roots. The snails keep moving, slow and steady, clinging to life at the meeting point of water and land. It's almost poetic, tiny creatures feeding an empire, never rushing, always patient. You realize, in their own way, they embody this floating world, fragile, persistent, always anchored between two states. The canoe glides forward, carrying baskets of shells that gleam faintly in the sun. You close your eyes for a moment, rocking with the rhythm, hearing the soft chorus of water, reeds, and the faint tapping of shells. And in that moment, the world feels perfectly balanced, one snail, one reed, one empire at a time. The farmer's canoe drifts steadily forward, baskets of snails stacked behind him, but your gaze lifts to the chinampas themselves. They stretch out in every direction, long narrow strips of green stitched together by winding canals. From where you float, they look like puzzle pieces inlaid into the lake, each piece alive with crops. The air is thick with the smell of damp earth, maize pollen, and a faint spice drifting from someone's morning cookfire. You squint at the fields, rows of maize tower above, their leaves whispering as they sway in the breeze. Between them, beans curl upward, gripping stalks like climbing ropes. Squash vines sprawl lazily at the base, their broad leaves shading the soil and keeping it moist. This trio, the three sisters, isn't just clever planting. It's survival strategy. Together, they give the soil what it needs, share space without competing, and feed a city with carbohydrates, protein, and vitamins. Forget fancy supermarkets, this is the original meal prep plan. As you paddle along, you notice more variety. Chili plants dot the rows, their green and red peppers glinting like tiny flames. Tomatoes swell on vines, prickly amaranth waves gently, and bright flowers punctuate the greenery. Some are for beauty, some for offerings, and some just to attract pollinators. You realize these gardens aren't just functional, they're layered with meaning, beauty, and ritual. Historians still argue whether chinampas could truly feed the entire population of Tenochtitlan, but the sheer abundance around you suggests it's not far-fetched. Imagine a city of perhaps 200,000 people, each day nourished by these floating fields. Compared to European cities of the same era, it's like discovering someone built a metropolis on top of a giant, fertile salad bar. You rest your chin on your hand, watching a group of farmers bend low to weed between rows. Their digging sticks click against stones, their movements synchronized. One whistles a tune, the others chuckle, and then silence falls again, just the sound of leaves brushing and the occasional splash of a paddle. It's strangely soothing, like listening to 1,000 tiny metronomes keeping time. Your stomach growls as you think about what these crops mean for daily meals. Maize is ground into tortillas and tamales, roasted on griddles, or puffed into popcorn. Beans simmer into stews, paired with squash, herbs, and chilies that pack enough heat to clear your sinuses twice over. Even the amaranth seeds are toasted and mixed with honey to make sticky, sweet treats. You catch yourself drooling a little, then quickly look away in case anyone notices. Yes, you're a time traveler, but you're still a human who gets hungry at the sight of good food. And here comes one of those quirky tidbits you weren't expecting. The Aztecs sometimes raised axolotls in the canals between chinampas. Those little salamanders with feathery gills weren't just adorable, they were edible. Imagine a world where your pet is also your dinner option. It's like keeping goldfish in your living room tank, except they're on the menu if times get rough. The sun rises higher, and the fields glitter with dew. A woman paddles by, her canoe piled high with fresh maize cobs, their husks tied neatly. She hums as she guides the boat with practiced strokes, heading toward the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan. You can almost hear the negotiations that will follow, vendors shouting prices, customers haggling fiercely, the hum of commerce fueled entirely by these floating plots. Historians still argue whether the Aztec markets were purely for trade or also doubled as social gatherings where alliances, gossip, and even marriages were arranged. You can imagine both, because food and people always come together wherever there's a crowd. A boy dashes across the chinampa, chasing after a turkey that escaped its pen. The bird flaps frantically, knocking over a basket of beans, while the boy yells and stumbles. The farmers roar with laughter, and even you can't help but grin. It's a reminder that amid all this grandeur and precision, daily life is messy, funny, and a little chaotic. Empires are built on laughter just as much as on stone and maize. The canal narrows, and you scrape reeds on either side of your canoe. Their tops brush against your arms, scattering droplets of water across your skin. You pause to watch dragonflies hover above the fields, their wings catching the sun like shards of glass. Somewhere deeper in the reeds, frogs croak, adding a bass note to the symphony of the gardens. It's nature and human labor woven so tightly you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. You lean back and let your hand trail in the water again. The lake is warm now, heated by the sun, and you feel a snail bump against your knuckle. You laugh softly, remembering the farmer's baskets from earlier. Maize may feed the masses, but the humble snail adds flavor, texture, maybe even ritual meaning. Everything here has its role. Suddenly, a gust of wind rushes over the chinampas, and the maize leaves rattle like thousands of whispers. You look up to see clouds gathering in the distance. Farmers glance at the sky uneasily. Storms can both nourish and destroy in this fragile ecosystem. A little rain means fertile soil. Too much means floods swallowing entire fields. Still, work continues. Farmers bend, plant, harvest, laugh, worry, and sing. You breathe in deeply, the air thick with life, and feel the enormity of what surrounds you. The chinampas aren't just gardens. They are the empire's beating heart, feeding soldiers, priests, nobles, and children alike. Without them, Tenochtitlan wouldn't just shrink, it would vanish. And here you are, drifting through the veins of that heart, caught between reeds, water, and history, realizing just how miraculous a floating garden can be. The farmer's canoe bumps gently against a post sunk into the mud, and he steadies it with one hand. You notice the baskets piled behind him, heavy with shells, and he waves you closer. This is where you learn the delicate, strangely satisfying art of snail gathering. He pulls the basket forward, showing you how the snails are sorted. The larger ones are kept for eating, their shells clinking softly like marbles. The smaller ones are gathered too, but set aside, perhaps for grinding into medicine, perhaps to be returned to the water to grow. Historians still argue whether Aztec snail harvesters worked with an eye toward sustainability or if they simply took whatever they could collect. Judging by the careful way this farmer handles them, you suspect it's a mix of both practical need balanced with quiet respect. You watch as he wades knee-deep into the canal, his fingers dipping beneath the roots of reeds. One by one, he pulls snails loose, dropping them into a net slung across his hip. The water clouds around his legs, murky with stirred silt, and you imagine all sorts of creatures eyeing him from the depths. Not crocodiles, remember, wrong continent, but snapping turtles lurk here, and they don't take kindly to trespassers poking around their neighborhood. You shift uncomfortably in your canoe, making a mental note. Snail harvesting comes with occupational hazards. His daughter joins in, smaller hands darting into the shallows with surprising speed. She laughs when she lifts a particularly plump snail, holding it high like a prize. You can't help but think she looks like a kid who's just won a carnival game. The father nods approvingly, and she beams, adding it to the basket with a triumphant clink. Then he motions for you to try. You lean over the side of your canoe, balancing carefully, and dip your hand into the water. The mud is cool and squishy, oozing between your fingers as you grope blindly for shells. You brush something smooth and rounded, pull it free, and there it is, a snail, wriggling slowly inside its spiral home. You grin, dropping it into your palm. Success. Until you lose your balance and nearly tip the canoe. The girl bursts out laughing, pointing at you as her father shakes his head with mock disapproval. Yep, you're the comic relief in this scene. Still, you try again, and this time you manage to grab 3 at once. Your basket is pitifully empty compared to theirs, but the farmer pats your shoulder, a gesture that says, "Not bad for a beginner." You feel oddly proud, even though your back is already sore from leaning awkwardly. Snail gathering is harder than it looks, who knew? One quirky tidbit comes to mind as you slog through the mud. Aztec records suggest snails were sometimes dried and ground into powder, then mixed with cacao to create medicinal drinks. Imagine ordering hot chocolate today and discovering it has a secret snail ingredient. It's good for your lungs, the seller would insist, while you quietly consider switching to tea. The sun climbs higher, and the work continues. The baskets grow heavy, the shells tapping like soft rain against woven reeds. Every so often, the farmer pauses to shake mud off his legs or stretch his back, muttering about the heat. His daughter doesn't seem to mind, darting around like she's playing hide-and-seek with the snails. You realize this isn't just labor, it's a rhythm of life, passed down from parent to child, blending necessity with familiarity. Historians still argue whether snail harvesting was a specialized trade or simply one of many tasks folded into daily farming. The way this family works suggests the latter. Snails are part of the abundance the chinampas offer, gathered alongside maize, beans, and herbs. Nothing wasted, everything woven into the empire's vast, hungry network. A canoe passes nearby, 2 men inside balancing baskets of reeds and gourds. They call out a joke to the farmer, and he laughs, tossing back a remark that makes them howl. Though you don't catch the words, the tone is universal, neighbors ribbing each other about who works harder or who caught more snails this week. You smile, because some humor never changes, no matter the century. Your hands ache from the effort, but you keep going, scooping, searching, finding. The shells glisten as they pile up, catching the sunlight like tiny jewels. You imagine them roasted with herbs, set before nobles in smoky feasts, or perhaps placed reverently on temple steps as offerings. Each shell carries weight far beyond its size. And then, the unexpected, a small, sleek creature darts between your fingers. You yelp and nearly drop the basket. The girl doubles over with laughter, pointing at the wriggling axolotl that just photobombed your harvest. The farmer chuckles too, shaking his head as if to say, "City folks scare easy." You laugh it off, though your heart is still thumping. Congratulations, you've just had your first amphibian jump scare. The work slows as the baskets near capacity. The farmer lifts his with a grunt, water streaming off the bottom. His daughter steadies the canoe while he sets it down carefully. Then he gestures for you to help haul the smaller basket. You grip the rough weave, surprised at how heavy it feels, the shells shifting like a bag of wet marbles. Together, you load it into the canoe, and for a moment you feel like part of the team. The canal quiets again as the farmer straightens up, stretching his arms to the sky. You follow his gaze. Clouds drift lazily, birds circle overhead, and the chinampas hum with life. Snail harvesting may not sound glamorous, but here, under the sun and beside the floating fields, it feels oddly sacred, like you're touching the heartbeat of the lake itself. You settle back into your canoe, hands coated in drying mud, the baskets clinking softly beside you. And you think, in this empire, even the smallest creatures matter. Each snail gathered, each reed woven, each drop of sweat, all of it adds up to the survival of thousands. It's slow work, humble work, but it's the kind of work that builds empires. The canoe glides back toward the chinampas, the baskets of snails resting heavy and quiet. The farmer gestures for you to follow, steering toward a clearing where smoke curls upward from a fire pit. The scent hits you before you even step ashore: charred maize husks, roasted chilies, and something richer, earthier. Tonight, the snails will become more than shells clinking in a basket. They'll become a meal. You crouch beside the fire as a woman kneels with a clay pot balanced over glowing embers. She sprinkles in herbs, the fragrance of epazote and hoja santa unfurling into the air. A younger boy tends another pot, shaking it gently so its contents don't scorch. The farmer's daughter dumps a basket of freshly cleaned snails onto a woven mat, their shells glistening from the water. They look small, humble, nothing like the kind of food you'd imagine feeding an empire. Yet here they are, about to join maize and chilies in the pot. The woman hums as she stirs, then adds ground chili paste. The mixture sizzles, releasing a sharp, smoky aroma that makes your eyes water and your stomach growl. She cracks a smile when she notices you sniffing at the steam, like a curious puppy hovering by the dinner table. It's the universal "you're about to get fed, don't worry" smile. One by one, she drops the snails into the pot. The shells clatter against the clay, a sound like tiny drums joining the kitchen's rhythm. She covers them with a layer of fresh maize leaves, trapping the steam. The smell deepens, smoky and herbal, with a salty tang rising from the snail meat as it cooks. You weren't sure how appetizing this would be, but now your mouth waters in spite of yourself. Historians still argue whether snails were a common meal for everyone or a delicacy reserved for nobles and special occasions. Some records hint that they appeared at banquets, prepared with care and paired with maize cakes. Others suggest farmers and laborers enjoyed them as simple protein when fish was scarce. Watching this family cook, you suspect both are true. Snails filled gaps when needed, but in the right hands, they also became dishes fit for a ruler. The boy brings over a basket of tortillas, still steaming from the comal, their surface blistered and browned. He pats them proudly, like showing off a freshly painted masterpiece. The woman nods, tears one in half, and uses it to scoop from the pot. She hands it to you, and for a moment you hesitate. Then you bite. The tortilla is warm and soft, the snail tender, bathed in chili and herbs. The flavor is rich, smoky, with a surprising sweetness beneath the spice. You chew slowly, savoring, while the family watches for your reaction. You give a thumbs up, and they burst out laughing, clapping you on the back as if you've just passed some ancient culinary test. One quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some sources suggest snails were even considered aphrodisiacs in certain Mesoamerican traditions. You take another bite, trying not to think too hard about whether the farmer is now smirking at you for reasons beyond your taste buds. The meal unfolds around the fire, each tortilla piled high, each bite accompanied by laughter, stories, and the occasional scolding when the boy drops too many crumbs. The farmer's daughter licks chili paste from her fingers, then points at you, daring you to eat another snail. You oblige, because honestly, they're better than you expected. Between bites, the farmer gestures toward the city, explaining, through tone and gesture more than words, how food like this sustains not just families but warriors, priests, and rulers. You picture grand banquets in the city's heart, nobles reclining, servers carrying platters of roasted snails, maize cakes, cacao drinks, and fruit. the firelight flickering on temple walls while laughter echoes into the night. The same food you're eating now, lifted to the level of ceremony. Historians still argue whether Aztec cuisine should be considered one of the world's first haute cuisines, but as you lick chili from your fingers, you're convinced. With ingredients like these, cooked over open flames and shared with warmth, the empire's food was both survival and art. You lean back, belly full, eyelids heavy from both the meal and the fire's warmth. The boy tosses a snail shell into the flames, where it pops faintly. The girl mimics him, adding her shell with a triumphant grin. Soon, a small pile of discarded shells glows red in the embers, like tiny stars crumbling into ash. The family begins to pack away baskets, scraping leftover food into clay bowls. The farmer pats your shoulder once more, his eyes twinkling as if to say, "Now you've eaten like us, you're one of us." You smile, though you know your time here is fleeting, carried only by the hum of history and the rhythm of storytelling. The fire crackles, the lake murmurs, and you realize the snails, so small, so unassuming, carry flavors that stretch from humble chinampa edges to the heart of noble feasts. They aren't just food. They're a connection between farmer and emperor, lake and temple, survival and celebration. You close your eyes, the taste of chili still tingling on your tongue, and drift into the warmth of the night, carried by the soft lull of the floating garden's eternal banquet. The fire crackles low, and the family sets aside the last of the meal. You're tempted to lean back, full and content, but the farmer motions toward the canoe again. His gesture is softer now, reverent. You realize he isn't just ferrying baskets of food tonight, he's carrying offerings. You push off from the chinampa, paddling behind him as the canal darkens in the falling dusk. The air cools, carrying the smell of damp earth and faint incense drifting from the city's temples. The farmer's canoe is quieter now. Instead of chatter and laughter, there's a hush, as if the very water expects silence. You look down at the baskets, no longer just food for dinner. The snails and flowers inside are arranged carefully, their placement deliberate. The canoe glides into a wider canal, opening toward the city's great temple district. Torches flicker along the banks, their light dancing on water like restless spirits. Ahead rises the Templo Mayor, its twin staircases climbing steeply, one dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god, the other to Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god. Their stone faces glow faintly in torchlight, and you feel your skin prickle. This is no ordinary delivery, this is tribute to the gods. Historians still argue whether snails were sacred offerings because of their spiral shells, symbols of fertility, water, and cycles, or simply because they were abundant, humble gifts tied to the lake itself. Watching the farmer, you suspect it's both. The snail is of the water, slow and patient, a creature that bridges land and lake. In a city built on both, it makes sense the gods would receive them. The farmer kneels in the canoe, lifting the first basket. His daughter steadies it as he places flowers, bright marigolds, white lilies, and crimson dahlias, beside the snails. The combination looks strangely beautiful, delicate petals against spiral shells, color against earth. You lean closer, noticing how the snails glisten in the torchlight. The offering seems alive, breathing, ready to speak if only you could hear it. He carries the basket up the temple steps, each footfall echoing against the stone. You follow at a respectful distance, heart thumping as drums sound faintly above. Priests wait near the top, their cloaks painted with symbols of rain and sun. They nod to the farmer, their eyes solemn, and accept the offering with a low chant. The shells clink as they're set down before the idol of Tlaloc. Incense curls upward, mingling with the night air, carrying the scent of copal resin, sweet, sharp, almost dizzying. You breathe it in and feel both soothed and unsettled. The priest scatters maize kernels around the snails, then sprinkles water from a clay vessel, droplets catching the torchlight like tiny sparks. You can't help but notice. A few children watch from the step's edge, wide-eyed, their hands clasped. One whispers to the other, perhaps a prayer for rain, perhaps just a story about the god's appetite for offerings. Either way, their eyes don't leave the shells. Even here, snails hold power beyond their size. A quirky tidbit floats through your thoughts. In some Mesoamerican traditions, snail shells were carved into trumpets. Imagine a priest lifting one to his lips, the sound deep and resonant, spiraling out like the shape of the shell itself. You half expect to hear one now, a mournful call over the lake, but tonight the offering is silent, save for the hiss of incense and the low hum of chants. The farmer steps back, bowing his head. His daughter mirrors him, though her eyes dart around curiously, as children's eyes always do. You follow suit, bowing low, though your knees creak in protest. The priest raises his arms, chanting to Tlaloc, calling for rain, fertility, and the balance of water. The words flow over you, foreign but rhythmic, like the lake's own language spoken aloud. Historians still argue whether every offering ceremony was filled with grandeur or if many were quiet, simple gestures like this. Standing here, you sense the scale doesn't matter. Whether a single basket of snails or an elaborate procession of captives and treasures, the purpose is the same, to remind gods and humans of their fragile pact. Life flows only if balance is kept. The chants fade, the incense burns low, and the offering is complete. The farmer takes his daughter's hand, guiding her back down the steps. You follow, glancing once more at the shells and flowers glowing faintly before the idol. They'll stay there until the next dawn, when priests sweep them aside for fresh tributes. But for now, they are sacred, lifted from mud and water to the very heart of the empire. As you step back into the canoe, you feel the city's hum around you, the mix of markets, laughter, drums, and prayers. The offering is done, but the cycle continues. Tomorrow, more snails will be gathered, more flowers cut, more incense burned. It never ends, just as the lake never stops lapping against the chinampas. The farmer dips his paddle, pushing away from the temple district. His daughter hums softly, her voice carrying over the water. The sound is gentle, almost like a lullaby. You lean back, the canoe rocking, and realize the snail harvest doesn't end at the basket or even the meal. It stretches higher, into smoke, prayer, and the hands of gods themselves. The canoe drifts into narrower canals again, away from the torches and chanting. The temple's echo fades, replaced by the softer noises of night, crickets, frogs, and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. You feel the calm seep back into your bones, the tension of sacred steps dissolving into ripples of water. The farmer hums, low and steady, as he paddles. At first it seems like a habit, the way someone today might whistle on a bike ride. But soon you notice the rhythm, his strokes and his song match. The daughter joins in, her voice lighter, weaving above his. The melody sways with the canoe, rising and falling in waves. You realize this isn't random. These are work songs, simple chants that keep labor flowing, paddles moving, back straight, and spirits from sinking under the weight of endless tasks. You've stumbled into an Aztec soundtrack, one older than memory. They teach you a line, motioning for you to echo them. The words stick awkwardly in your throat, but you try. Your voice cracks on the first attempt. The girl giggles, and you roll your eyes dramatically. Fine. Karaoke was never your strong suit anyway. But you try again, and soon the chant flows from your mouth, not perfect, but close enough to make the farmer grin. Historians still argue whether these songs were improvised or carefully preserved, passed down from elder to child like heirlooms. Some think they were simply practical rhythms, others believe they carried hidden prayers, small invocations tucked inside daily tasks. Listening closely, you hear words for water, maize, and sun. Maybe it's both. A work song that also doubles as a blessing. Why waste breath when each word can plant a seed of protection? The paddling grows hypnotic. Dip, pull, rise, drip. The chant folds into the sound of dripping paddles, and your body sways without thinking. It's almost like a lullaby, though one meant to keep you awake, not asleep. You picture rows of farmers out on the lake, each canoe carrying voices that rise together, weaving across the water. The canals themselves must have hummed with constant music, a floating choir powered by sweat and laughter. A quirky tidbit pops into your head. Some Aztec work songs reportedly included playful insults. Imagine one farmer teasing another about crooked maize rows, or joking that his canoe leaks worse than a politician's promises. You wonder if the farmer's daughter is slipping some sly joke into the chant right now, since she keeps smirking at you between verses. You sing anyway, hoping you're not accidentally calling yourself snail breath in Nahuatl. The canoe slows as you pass other workers. Their voices ripple across the water, different songs but the same rhythm. A man pulling weeds on a chinampa belts a tune so loudly that nearby herons take flight. Another group of women kneels at the water's edge, washing clothes while their song rises in sharp, playful bursts. The sounds overlap, a mosaic of human labor stitched together by melody. You spot an older man by himself, bent over a basket of maize. His voice cracks with age, but he sings steadily, each note a promise that his body will keep moving as long as his voice does. The farmer calls out to him, and their songs briefly merge into a shared verse before drifting apart again. Historians still argue whether music like this was meant primarily for morale or if it held communal power, a way of binding neighbors together across distance. Watching the voices echo between chinampas, you can't deny it feels like both. Work becomes lighter when someone else is singing just out of sight. You paddle harder, matching the farmer's rhythm, and for a moment you almost believe you belong to this chorus of the lake. The daughter begins clapping her hands against the canoe's side, turning the chant into percussion. You join in, your palms stinging but your grin spreading. The sound bounces off the water, a hollow drumbeat that adds another layer to the melody. Soon, other children on nearby rafts answer with their own claps, a call and response of laughter and rhythm. It's like the lake itself is alive, its surface vibrating with music. The chant winds down as the canoe glides into a cluster of reeds. The farmer dips his paddle, letting the current carry you slowly. The daughter leans back, sighing, her hands trailing in the water. You feel your own shoulders loosen, as if the song has wrung out the day's tension and left only calm. In the quiet that follows, the farmer explains something through gestures. Singing isn't just habit, it's protection. Without rhythm, work feels endless. Without song, the lake feels heavy, the mud too deep, the weeds too many. Music is as necessary as maize, a staple that feeds not the belly, but the spirit. You nod, understanding in a way that needs no words. The stars come out above the lake, scattered silver across a velvet sky. Their reflection shimmers in the water, and for a moment you can't tell if you're floating through the heavens or the canals. The farmer starts another song, this one slower, softer, more like a prayer than a chant. His daughter hums quietly, her voice like a reed bending in the wind. You don't join this time. You just listen, letting the melody carry you into the night, across waters that hum with both work and worship. The night deepens, but the canals don't sleep. Torches still flicker in the distance, marking floating markets where late-night traders linger. You drift past stalls balanced precariously on rafts, their canopies swaying with the breeze. Voices rise, not in song this time, but in bargaining tones, sharp, deliberate, tinged with both friendliness and competition. You lean closer, curious. The words are about more than chilies and maize. They're about power. A group of men sits cross-legged on a reed mat, their baskets piled with maize cakes, beans, and bundles of snails. One lifts a snail basket into the torchlight, showing off its sheen like a jeweler flashing gemstones. Another shakes his head, unimpressed, countering with a bag of cacao beans. The haggling begins. You realize you're watching more than farmers trade, you're watching the gears of tribute grind in real time. Historians still argue whether tribute was more burden or privilege. Was it crushing, forcing villages to surrender food they barely had? Or was it a mark of status, proof that a community was important enough to be noticed by the empire? Either way, the system fed Tenochtitlan's heart, ensuring the city's temples and palaces never went hungry. The farmer nods toward the exchange, his face unreadable. You can tell he's been here before, dropping off his own baskets. Tonight, though, his role is quieter. He steers the canoe closer so you can hear. One trader insists his snails are fatter, richer, perfect for temple offerings. Another scoffs, claiming his village's waters are purer, making their snails taste like heaven. You smirk. It sounds like two modern coffee shops bragging about whose beans are more authentic. Marketing, it seems, is timeless. A priest approaches, his cloak heavy with embroidered patterns of waves and spirals. The crowd quiets. His presence shifts the air, like a teacher entering a rowdy classroom. He inspects the baskets, nods slowly, then announces which ones will be sent to the temples as tribute. The chosen trader beams, chest puffed, while the others mutter under their breath. You feel the sting of rejection for them. Imagine raising crops, harvesting snails, only to be told your offering isn't good enough for the gods. Brutal. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some accounts suggest that certain tribute items weren't just food but live animals, frogs, fish, even turtles, delivered wriggling in baskets to prove freshness. You shudder at the thought of a priest opening a lid only to have a turtle snap at his fingers. Maybe that's why the snail was so popular. At least it stayed politely in its shell. The farmer explains through gestures. Tribute doesn't just flow upward, it flows outward. Villages send maize, beans, chilies, and snails to the city. In return, they receive protection, tools, sometimes even prestige. But you can sense the tension beneath it. Protection doesn't always feel like choice. It feels like obligation, like chains tied with flowers. Historians still argue whether tribute alone sustained the empire or if markets carried equal weight. Watching these men haggle, you see both. Tribute is duty, markets are freedom. One feeds the gods, the other feeds the people. Both are necessary. Both keep the canals flowing with life. As the priest departs, the traders return to their arguments, though quieter now, their pride slightly bruised. You hear one mutter about sending his best snails to the nobles instead, where feasts don't require divine approval. Another laughs, suggesting the gods have picky appetites. The farmer's daughter snickers, and you cover your mouth to hide a grin. Somewhere, a priest would be furious if he knew snails were the butt of a midnight joke. The canoe pushes onward, leaving the market behind. Yet the debate clings to you like damp air. Who decides which food is sacred, which is noble, which is common? Is a snail on a reed mat really so different from one on a temple step? You can almost hear voices of scholars echoing in your head, still arguing centuries later, flipping through codices and scratching their heads about what tribute truly meant. The farmer dips his paddle, his strokes sharper now, his face set. Maybe he's remembering his own tribute days, hauling baskets heavier than comfort, handing them over with no guarantee of recognition. His daughter rests her chin on the canoe's edge, staring at her reflection in the water. For her, it might be just another part of life, snails and flowers for the gods, maize for the markets, no questions asked. But you, drifting here with them, can't help but ask. The canals whisper of exchange, power, and survival. Every basket of snails is more than food, it's currency, tribute, sacrifice, and pride. You glance back once more, the torches of the market shrinking into fireflies in the distance. The voices fade, but the arguments linger. Who owes what, and to whom? The question floats unanswered across the lake, just like the canoes themselves. The torches of the marketplace fade behind you, and soon the canal darkens into quiet stretches of water. For a while you think it's peaceful, almost too peaceful, until you feel a ripple under the canoe. The farmer pauses, raising a hand. You freeze. The water bulges, then smooths again, as if something large just brushed beneath the surface. You lean closer, peering into the black water, and instantly regret it. A flash of scales, the flick of a tail, something big swims here, bigger than you'd prefer to imagine. The farmer mutters softly, keeping his paddle ready, while his daughter stares wide-eyed. You sit back slowly, deciding that tonight is not the night to test whether crocodiles enjoy midnight snacks. Historians still argue whether the lakes around Tenochtitlan held crocodiles, caimans, or just very large turtles mistaken for monsters in stories. Whatever the case, the waters held their share of teeth. The Aztecs navigated them daily, armed not just with paddles but with sharp eyes and sharper reflexes. The canals were highways of life, but also danger. The canoe drifts onward, and soon the real pests arrive, mosquitoes. They rise in clouds, whining in your ears, landing on your arms like they paid tribute for the right to feast. You swat, mutter, and swat again. The farmer chuckles at your misery, while his daughter waves them away with practiced ease. She gestures to a clay pot smeared with something thick and dark. You dip a finger in and sniff. It smells unpleasant. When you realize it's a mix of herbs and animal dung, you hesitate. She smears some on her arms and beams. You sigh and dab a little on your own skin. Immediately, the mosquitoes back off. Congratulations, you now reek like ancient insect repellent. At least it works. A quirky tidbit slips into your memory. Aztec texts describe crocodile dung, mixed with resins, being used not just as bug repellent but even as sunscreen. You pat your arms proudly, half protected from insects, half ridiculous. Who needs modern SPF when you can smell like a swamp? The farmer steers into a cluster of reeds, whispering for quiet. Ahead, ripples spread slowly, deliberately. Then you see it, a turtle, massive, its shell broad as the canoe itself. It surfaces with a low grunt, eyes glinting, before sinking back into the dark. The daughter gasps, pointing excitedly. You nod quickly, but inside you're thinking, if that thing tips us over, you're not surviving. Historians still argue whether turtles this size were hunted or avoided. Some sources suggest their meat and shells were prized, others hint they were left alone, respected as ancient water spirits. Watching this one vanish into the depths, you're firmly on team let's leave it alone. The canoe glides carefully onward. The reeds close in, brushing your arms, hiding what lurks beneath. Every splash makes you flinch. Was that a fish? A snake? You remind yourself, the Aztecs navigated this daily. Children played in these waters. Farmers bathed here, washed clothes, gathered snails. Danger was constant, but so was adaptation. The daughter leans over suddenly, plucking a floating snail shell. She holds it to her ear, giggling, then hands it to you. You play along, pretending to hear ocean waves, though what you really hear is the frantic thud of your own heart. Still, her smile steadies you. Maybe this isn't about fear. Maybe it's about respect, living with dangers instead of fighting them. The farmer begins humming again, low and steady, and you notice how his rhythm calms the water's tension. Each paddle stroke feels deliberate, certain, like a heartbeat syncing with the lake. You mirror him, dipping your paddle slowly, carefully. The reeds part, the canal widens, and suddenly the night opens above you again, starlight scattered across the water. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. The farmer's daughter laughs at your dramatic exhale, mimicking it so exaggeratedly you can't help but chuckle too. You wave her off, muttering that you totally weren't scared, though the farmer's grin says otherwise. Historians still argue whether the dangers of these waters, mosquitoes, turtles, crocodiles, sudden sinkholes, were exaggerated in later retellings. Maybe they were, maybe not. But as you sit here, smelling like crocodile dung sunscreen and remembering that turtle's stare, you're convinced the dangers were real enough. The canoe drifts gently now, danger left behind, and you realize something. Fear sharpens the memory. The floating gardens aren't just idyllic rafts of maize and flowers, they're survival, carved out of risky waters, protected by tradition, song, and yes, even dung-based bug spray. You pat your arms again, wrinkle your nose at the smell, and smile. Somehow, the danger makes the gardens even more alive. The canoe glides toward a gathering space tucked between chinampas, where firelight flickers on reed mats and figures sit in a circle. Their cloaks shimmer with feathers, painted faces glowing in the fire's reflection. These are not farmers tonight, they are scholars, keepers of knowledge, guardians of stories. You sit quietly at the edge, feeling the weight of their presence. Their voices carry not just wisdom but argument, each word sharp as obsidian. One man holds up a snail shell, spiraled and gleaming. He rolls it in his palm, speaking slowly, as though the shell itself is a text to be read. He insists snails carry healing power, that their mucus soothes burns and wounds, their meat strengthens the body. Another scoffs, waving his hand. Snails. Healing. No. They are symbols. Omens. When they multiply too quickly, it means floods are coming. When they vanish, drought. Nothing more. Historians still argue whether Aztec healers truly used snail mucus in medicine or if this is a later embellishment. Sitting here, you hear both sides voiced with equal passion, as though centuries of debate are compressed into this single circle of fire. A third scholar interrupts, his feathered headdress swaying. He claims snails are divine messengers, their spiral shells echoing the cycles of the sun, the moon, and time itself. Look closer, he urges, pressing the shell into your hand. The spiral never ends. Neither does the calendar. Neither do the gods' demands. You turn the shell over, tracing the curve. He's right, it feels infinite, as if you could fall into it forever. The circle erupts in debate. Some nod at the spiral argument, others shake their heads, insisting it's overreach. A snail is a snail, one says flatly, and if you don't eat it, it will eat your crops. You smile at the bluntness. Leave it to scholars to turn supper into metaphysics. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some Aztec artifacts include tiny snail shell trumpets, drilled with holes to be played like flutes. You imagine one of these feathered scholars pausing mid-argument to toot on a snail trumpet just to prove a point. Honestly, that might win the debate faster than words. The farmer and his daughter sit nearby, listening politely. Their eyes flick from speaker to speaker, but their hands remain busy mending nets, weaving reeds. To them, the scholar's words might feel lofty, detached. They gather snails for meals, for markets, for tribute. Whether the shells mirror cosmic cycles or not doesn't change the fact that someone has to pick them from the reeds before dusk. Historians still argue whether these scholarly circles influenced daily life or whether they were confined to temples and elite gatherings. Watching now, you suspect both. The farmers provide food, the scholars provide meaning. Together, they keep the empire turning. The debate sharpens. One scholar slams his staff into the ground, declaring that snails cause illness if eaten at the wrong season, their slime carrying unseen curses. Another argues the opposite, that snails, combined with herbs, cure stomach pains. Voices rise, hands gesture wildly, feathers shake in the firelight. You brace for someone to fling a snail like a weapon, but the tension remains verbal, fiery, but respectful. Finally, an elder clears his throat. His voice is softer, slower, but it silences the others. He tells a story of a boy who carried a snail to the temple, only to have it vanish in his hands, leaving behind a pool of water that quenched a drought. The scholars nod, some reluctantly. The story is neither proof nor nonsense. It is memory, myth, and lesson all in one. The elder passes the snail shell back to you. Its spiral glints in the firelight. You feel the weight of all their arguments pressing into its curve: healing, omen, symbol, food. Which is it? All of them? None. The shell offers no answer, only silence. The debate winds down, voices softening into murmurs. The scholars lean back, satisfied enough for tonight. Some sip cacao, others chew maize cakes. The fire pops, sending sparks upward like tiny stars joining the night sky. The farmer rises, gesturing for you to follow. His daughter tugs at your sleeve, eager to leave before another round of arguments begins. You slip the snail shell into the farmer's basket, leaving the question behind with the circle of feathers. As the canoe pushes off again, you glance back. The scholars sit silhouetted against the fire, still gesturing, still debating, their shadows flickering like restless spirits. You smile. Arguments like theirs don't end. They spiral endlessly, just like the shells they hold. The night feels softer now, less heavy with arguments and ritual. The canoe slips between chinampas where families settle down for rest. Lamps glow faintly through woven reed walls, laughter and chatter trickling out like sparks. Then you hear it, bright, high-pitched giggles that ripple across the water. The farmer's daughter perks up, grinning, and points. Children are still awake. You follow her to a wide canal where small rafts bump gently together. On them, kids chase one another with sticks for paddles, racing their miniature chinampas like bumper boats. Their shouts echo through the reeds, their joy so loud it drowns even the frogs' chorus. You can't help but laugh as one raft tips just enough to spill its pilot knee-deep into the canal. He surfaces sputtering, hair dripping, then splashes his friends in revenge. Historians still argue whether children were expected to help in the fields at every moment or if they were given space for play. You watch now and suspect it was both. These rafts teach balance, paddling, teamwork. Every game is also a lesson disguised as laughter. One girl waves at you, then crouches low with intense focus. She scoops into the shallows with her small hands and lifts a snail triumphantly, holding it like treasure. Her friends rush over, competing to find their own. Soon, a whole line of kids kneels at the water's edge, comparing shells, laughing at the biggest and teasing whoever grabbed only a tiny one. The farmer's daughter joins them without hesitation, her hands darting through the reeds with practiced ease. You crouch too, pretending you're in on the competition. Within moments, you pluck a shell from the mud, proud as a champion. Then one boy holds up a snail the size of a plum, smirking. The others cheer, declaring him tonight's king of snails. You bow dramatically to him, which earns you a chorus of giggles. A quirky tidbit pops into your thoughts. Some Aztec children used snail shells as whistles or toys, drilling tiny holes to make shrill sounds that likely drove parents crazy. Watching the kids now, you imagine the same thing happening centuries ago, mothers rolling their eyes while their children proudly parade around, tooting snail shell flutes at dawn. Some things never change. The games continue, kids balancing on the narrow canoe edges, splashing each other, daring one another to grab at darting fish. You wince, half expecting one to topple completely, but they're surprisingly skilled, their bodies moving with the water's rhythm. These canals are their playground, their school, their inheritance. Historians still argue whether Aztec childhood was harsher than ours, filled with discipline, chores, and strict preparation for adult roles. Watching these kids, though, you see resilience wrapped in joy. The discipline is there. How else do you balance on a raft without falling? But the laughter makes the lessons lighter. As the play winds down, the children gather on a chinampa edge, sharing their snail prizes. Some drop the shells back into the water with whispered wishes, as though returning them is part of the game. Others tuck them into pouches, trophies to show off later. The boy with the plum-sized snail struts proudly, his friends trailing like loyal courtiers. The farmer chuckles, watching his daughter return, her hair damp from a splash battle, her hands clutching two small snails. She shows them to him with a grin. He nods approvingly, tucks one into his pouch, and gives the other to you. Its spiral gleams faintly under the moon, small but perfect. You tuck it into your pocket, already knowing it'll rattle like memory whenever you walk. The children's laughter fades as families call them back. Reed doors close, lamps dim, and the canal grows quieter again. Yet the air still buzzes faintly with their joy, as though the lake itself absorbed their giggles. You lean back, smiling, realizing the chinampas aren't just fields or floating gardens, they're childhoods, playgrounds, and memories etched into water. The canoe moves on, leaving ripples behind. You hold the little snail shell, turning it between your fingers. For the farmers, it's food. For the priests, it's offering. For the scholars, it's symbol. But for the children, it's just a game piece, a shiny prize, something to laugh over. Somehow, that feels the most timeless of all. The air grows heavy, thicker than before, as clouds creep across the sky. You sense it first in the stillness, the frogs pause their chorus, the breeze dies, the water holds its breath. The farmer glances upward, frowning. His daughter pulls her cloak tighter. You follow their gaze, and your stomach sinks. Dark storm clouds are rolling in from the horizon, swallowing the stars. The canoe rocks as the first gust hits. Reeds bend sharply, whispering in alarm. A flash of lightning splits the sky, turning the chinampas silver for a heartbeat before plunging everything back into darkness. Thunder rolls so deep it rattles the wooden frame beneath you. You grip the canoe's edge, muttering a quiet nope under your breath. The farmer shouts something short and sharp, an order to paddle. You don't need a translation. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs feared storms as wrathful punishments from Tlaloc or welcomed them as gifts of rain. Sitting here, with rain spitting against your face and lightning cracking like the gods are snapping photos of you, it feels like both. A storm is blessing and threat, life and destruction wrapped in one. You paddle furiously, following the farmer's lead. The daughter kneels low, steadying the baskets. Rain slams down harder, drenching your clothes until they cling like second skin. The canal churns with ripples, black waves threatening to shove the canoe sideways. You grit your teeth and keep paddling, trying not to think about the crocodile-sized turtle from earlier. The farmer steers toward the chinampa edges, searching for shelter. Finally, he angles into a gap in the reeds, dragging the canoe halfway onto the mud. You scramble out, slipping, splashing, but managing to stand. The family huddles beneath a reed lean-to built for nights exactly like this. You squeeze in, shivering, dripping like a soaked dog. The daughter bursts into giggles at your bedraggled state, and despite yourself, you laugh too. Inside the shelter, the storm roars. Rain drums against the reeds like 1,000 frantic hands. Wind howls through the cracks, carrying the smell of wet earth and ozone. The farmer pulls a blanket over his daughter, who curls against him, eyes wide but calm. You hug your knees, trying to ignore the fact that you look like a drowned otter. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Aztec farmers sometimes timed their planting by watching the behavior of snails. If the creatures climbed high onto reeds, it meant flooding rains were coming. If they buried deep in mud, drought loomed. You glance at the snail shell still in your pocket, wondering if you should have checked it before setting out tonight. Maybe it tried to warn you. Thunder crashes so loudly the reed shelter shakes. You wince, pressing your palms over your ears. The farmer, though, raises his hand toward the sky, muttering what sounds like a prayer. His voice is steady, as if speaking to an old friend rather than a furious god. The daughter mimics him, her small hand lifted, eyes squeezed shut. You copy them awkwardly, raising your hand and whispering a clumsy "thanks for the rain please don't kill me" kind of prayer. Historians still argue whether rituals during storms were formal ceremonies or simple gestures like this: farmers raising hands, families chanting quietly, children singing to calm their fear. Watching now, you sense it didn't need grandeur. The storm itself was the ceremony. Every flash of lightning was a drumbeat. Every roll of thunder was a chant. The minutes crawl, but eventually the storm shifts. Rain softens to drizzle, thunder rumbles farther away, and the reeds stop trembling. You peek outside, watching the clouds drift east, leaving the moon to peek through their ragged edges. The lake steams faintly where warm rain met cool water, mist curling like breath over the canals. The farmer pats your shoulder, his face calm again. His daughter yawns, already forgetting the fear. You step back into the canoe, shoes squelching, hair plastered, but heart oddly steady. You survived an Aztec storm. Okay, maybe barely survived is more accurate, but you're still here, floating on waters that shift between gift and danger with every gust. The canal glitters faintly with snail shells washed loose by the storm, their spirals catching moonlight as they bob. You scoop one up, holding it high. The daughter cheers, declaring you tonight's storm champion. You bow dramatically, water dripping from your nose, and she cackles. Even in chaos, joy finds a way to slip in. The canoe drifts again, calmer now, the storm fading behind. You realize the floating gardens aren't just clever farming, they're resilience. They bend, they soak, they endure. Just like the people who live here, who gather snails, plant maize, sing in the rain, and laugh even when drenched. The storm has passed, but the air feels different now, charged, unsettled, as if the night itself is holding its breath. The farmer guides the canoe back into the main canal, and you notice the water carries a strange glow. Torches flicker in the distance, not the soft, steady flames of farmers heading home, but sharp, marching lights. Shadows move with them, shadows that do not belong to this place. Your chest tightens. You know what's coming, even if you've tried to ignore it until now. Foreign sails. Ships larger than any canoe. Men with armor that clinks instead of rustling like reeds. The floating gardens that felt eternal suddenly seem fragile, like toy rafts compared to what looms at the edges of the empire. The farmer doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His jaw is set, his paddling firm, his eyes refusing to linger on the torches. His daughter, though, whispers, asking if these strangers will like the taste of roasted snails. You almost laugh at the innocence, but the sound sticks in your throat. Historians still argue whether the arrival of the Spaniards was first met with curiosity, fear, or cautious hospitality. Sitting here, you feel all three knotted together. Curiosity, because who wouldn't stare at horses clattering through water? Fear, because steel blades gleam sharper than obsidian. Hospitality, because the Aztecs believed gods sometimes walked among men, and how could you risk offending one? The canoe glides past chinampas where families stand silently, watching the horizon. Farmers clutch baskets, children cling to their parents, priests pace with torches. Even the dogs are quiet, their usual barks hushed into whines. It's as if the entire lake knows the world is shifting beneath its surface. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. When the Spaniards first saw the chinampas, they mistook them for solid land. They thought the gardens were natural islands, until they watched farmers casually push poles into the mud to move them. Imagine their shock, expecting firm ground, only to discover floating farms teeming with snails. You grin briefly, picturing a conquistador flailing as a raft tips beneath his shiny boots. Small revenge, maybe, but still satisfying. The farmer's daughter points toward the city's heart. Tenochtitlan glimmers like a jewel, torches outlining its causeways, temples piercing the night sky. But beyond the glitter, the shadows of foreign ships loom larger, their sails pale and ghostly under the moon. You feel the chill of it, an empire at its height, yet teetering on the edge. The farmer pauses his paddling, letting the canoe drift. His eyes trace the gardens, the reeds, the snails clinging stubbornly to roots despite the storm, despite the coming change. His daughter tugs his sleeve, whispering that the snails will still need harvesting tomorrow. He nods slowly, perhaps comforted by the thought that some cycles endure even when empires collapse. Historians still argue whether the floating gardens survived conquest because they were too useful to destroy or whether they were gradually eroded by neglect and expansion. Tonight, gazing at the quiet chinampas, you hope they'll endure forever. The snail shells glint faintly, as if agreeing, promising to outlast both obsidian and steel. The silence deepens. You hear distant drums from the city, beating low and steady, as though answering the foreign cannons you imagine waiting offshore. The sound wraps around you, ancient and proud, a heartbeat against the march of shadows. You realize you're witnessing not just fields of maize and baskets of snails, but a people standing on the edge of history. The farmer dips his paddle again, pushing the canoe forward. His daughter hums softly, a lullaby you don't recognize, her voice steady against the gathering storm of change. You clutch the snail shell in your pocket, suddenly aware it may become a relic, a whisper from a world about to vanish. And yet, the canals still flow. The chinampas still float. The snails still cling. Life insists on continuing, even as empires tremble. You exhale slowly, letting the rhythm of the paddle and the child's song steady your thoughts. Whatever happens next, this night remains carved in water, reeds, and spirals. The canoe drifts quietly now, away from the city's heart, away from the storm and the torchlight. The air feels calmer, though heavy with what you've seen. The farmer doesn't speak. His daughter leans against him, eyelids drooping, her lullaby fading into slow breaths. You sit at the stern, letting the paddle rest across your knees, watching ripples stretch across the moonlit water. The chinampas pass by like dream fragments, rows of maize glistening in damp soil, bean vines curling around poles, squash blossoms still bright even in shadow. Reeds bend softly, whispering against the night. Snail shells glimmer faintly on the banks, stubborn little spirals clinging no matter what storms or armies come. Historians still argue whether the floating gardens you've glided through were the peak of agricultural genius or simply one brilliant adaptation among many. But floating here, seeing their resilience, you can't imagine the city surviving without them. These gardens fed Tenochtitlan, shaped its rhythm, gave life even as they asked for endless labor in return. The canoe glides into open water. The farmer lifts his paddle once more, steering toward the far shore. His daughter sleeps soundly, a tiny snail shell still clenched in her hand like a charm. You smile, thinking how children measure empires not by battles or rulers but by simple treasures pulled from the mud. A quirky thought sneaks in. Imagine centuries from now, archaeologists finding only piles of snail shells and scratching their heads. Was this a snail-worshipping cult? They might wonder. You chuckle softly, then hush yourself, not wanting to wake the girl. The farmer catches your eye and nods once, a quiet farewell. The canoe eases against the shore. You step onto damp earth, legs stiff, shoes still squishing from the earlier storm. You turn back for one last look. The farmer gathers his daughter into his arms, the canoe rocking gently beneath him. He pushes off without a word, vanishing between reeds, his paddle leaving only faint ripples that fade as quickly as dreams. The lake lies still. The chinampas float in silence. The snail shells gleam faintly, 1,000 tiny spirals holding stories you've only begun to glimpse. You exhale, slow and deep, letting the night wrap around you like a blanket. The journey has carried you across water, through harvests, storms, songs, debates, dangers, and laughter. And now, it carries you into rest. So now, with the lake quieting and the last ripples smoothing into glass, let yourself soften too. Picture the canals stretching endlessly, silvered by the moon, calm after the storm. The chinampas float in rows, their crops safe, their reeds swaying gently, their snails tucked snug beneath the water's edge. Nothing urgent now, nothing demanding. Just the steady rhythm of water and the slow breath of night. The air is cooler here, damp but soothing, like a soft cloth laid across a tired forehead. The torches in the distance grow dim, their light more aglow than a flame, fading until they're nothing but stars above the water. Every sound gentles, the frogs murmur low, the reeds sigh with each faint breeze, and somewhere, far away, a lullaby hums as a child drifts deeper into sleep. Imagine yourself lying back in the canoe, eyes half closed, letting the stars tilt and shimmer overhead. The world is vast but kind in this moment. The water rocks you slowly, cradling you like a parent with infinite patience. The snail shell in your hand is smooth and cool, its spiral pulling your thoughts inward, slower, softer, until they unravel into stillness. Whatever storms you've weathered today, let them drift away with the current. Whatever noise lingers in your mind, let it quiet like reeds after the wind. You're safe here, afloat on calm waters, with only moonlight and whispers of ancient gardens for company. And as you slip into rest, carry that image, the floating gardens, the laughter of children, the glint of snail shells, like a gentle dream that keeps you anchored through the night.